Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Monday, March 13th, 2017 edition of VR News. What a gong show and a weird set of events that saw last night's March 12th news video taken offline. Not going to get into the details here. For those of you who don't care, I'm going to move on right to news. If you do and you're curious, head on over to last night's video. I've pinned a comment to the top of the comment section where I explain exactly what happened. That ultimately ended up taking 14 hours to fix. All right, let's start with the VR and the RoadtoVR Killer App Series, where they interview prominent people in virtual reality and basically ask them their opinion on the concept of a killer app and questions surrounding that. So today's interviewee was Alvin Graylin, who is HTC Vive China region president. Thought his answers were really good. They weren't cookie cutter. They had some thought behind them. The first question, what traits do you think VR's killer app needs to have? And what I like here is he talked about the concept of a killer app being more console-centric. In other words, the whole Halo Xbox or Mario Nintendo is more of a console thing. He does, mention the PC. For example, when Lotus 123 and WordPerfect, that sold a lot of PCs to the business community. And then, of course, VGA sold a lot of gaming PCs a little later. And it was that tandem action between those two that ultimately made the PC such a popular platform. So I like his thinking there that it's probably not going to be that specific, a killer app. But what does he mean by that? Well, he gets into that in his second answer to the question, if you had to make a bet, which sector would you predict that the killer app would show up in? And he basically says, I don't think it's going to be that specific, a specific genre. I think it's going to be something bigger, something more like MMOs. An MMO that's very experience/discovery based. That's kind of what he sees as being VR's, quote unquote killer app, right? What I love about that is just the irony in that. A lot of naysayers standing on the sidelines looking at us here in VR saying, the doom and gloom type scenarios. And that it's not social being probably the biggest one. When MMOs are probably the most social form of gameplay after obviously being in the same room in person. I mean, if you've played World of Warcraft or some of those games, the amount of social interaction you have to do, for example, if you're raiding in an MMO, you're part of a high-level raiding guild, there's a lot of communication, a lot of social interaction that has to take place to be successful. So I've never kind of bought into that anyways, but it's nice to see Alvin comment on that. And then, of course, asked when he thinks it's going to launch. And I also liked his answer here. He basically said, not in the short term, probably end of 2018, 2019, before we see that type of an application emerge, which I think is realistic. Next story, the Intel Project Alloy HMDs. We looked at these in the past. The last time was a little critical of the tracking. There were a lot of issues, but to be fair, still in its infancy. It was a prototype that we were dealing with, and it was far from retail ready by their admission and the person looking at the headset. Well, now we're getting word from Aiken Bowmilk, who is the head of the company's Perceptual Computer Group, what the cost is going to be for it. And he feels it's going to be $600 to $900 US, all in. And he makes the argument, the justification being that these are fully self-contained in that they've got a GPU and a CPU all on board. And I get part of that argument, I do. But if we're going to compare apples to apples, let's be real, that would be closer to kind of comparing it to a laptop or something else, not a desktop. It's not in that same realm of performance. It's going to be good, but it's not in that same realm. So ultimately, how does that price look? I personally think it's still a little too high. Cost prohibitive. And I'd be interested in hearing your guys' thoughts. Do you think that's a barrier to entry, having that kind of a price range? Kind of just to further my opinion on that, the reason I say that is I think there's only so many units that are going to be able to hold people's attention, desire, that are ultimately going to make this. As much as I say, look, I want VR to succeed, period, there's going to be winners and losers. We've also said that. And I think ultimately the winners are the ones that are going to be able to sell features, even though the price isn't that attractive initially, get some critical mass, and then be able to pass on, price relief to sustain themselves, keep the momentum going. Not everybody's going to be able to pull that off, and that's maybe where these guys come in. But they haven't even had a chance to prove themselves yet. Let's at least give them that intel. It'll be interesting to see a full retail version and then assess what it's capable of and how that price looks just before it goes to market. And the next story, Oculus exclusives hampering developers. This will come probably as a bit of a surprise, according to someone from HTC. Now, the two I wouldn't say it's been a love-in with these guys since launch, but it's been pretty amiable. I think we all agree to that, especially on HTC's side of the equation. They've probably had more nice things to say, and it's not that Oculus said bad things, they just weren't very complimentary either. And fine, they don't need to be, just an observation. But now, according to Vice President of Global VR Content, Joel Breton, he feels that the exclusivity, the approach that they're taking with exclusive games is going to hamper developers' ability to create large communities because it blocks them out from other platforms. Then the argument was raised, and we've talked about this as well in the past, that exclusivity is not all a bad thing. And even though I don't like it as a concept, there are positives to it. And one argument that certainly stands is having a title be exclusive initially when there aren't a lot of units out there to help keep that company afloat is valid. But staying that way probably isn't. At some point, they've got to be self-sufficient and truly be able to survive on their own merits, on their own technology, and grow the platform. The ones that can't, they're going to go away. And at this point, I'd love for as many to stick around for as long as possible. But realistically, there's going to be casualties. And so it's interesting that he says that. But fleshing it out a little bit more, he says, to explain that for developers in the long term, they can't develop relative to the market size, and Oculus is putting more cash in than the market can recoup, or the developer can ever recoup. Thus, studios might struggle to adapt with future titles and are going to struggle because they're not able to develop at the size and scope that accurately reflects the market, which is kind of what I was saying, but fleshed out quite a bit more. So it's an interesting thought process. What do you guys think? Do you agree or disagree? Maybe you feel that exclusivity is not an issue, can stay around for as long as it wants, or you think otherwise. Either way, want to hear from you. And this next story has to do with Virry VR, which is PlayStation VR's first 360-degree video that has a price tag attached to it. The 360 film in question is basically a nature documentary. It is, or was, filmed in the Kenyan savannas in Lua Downs, which is a UNESCO heritage site in northern Kenya. You've got your zebras, you've got elephants, rhinos, leopards, all kinds of animals running around, but you're paying for it. And it's $8 US for that entry level price. And at first I was kind of thinking, is it justifiable to charge? Well, ultimately, that's going to be up to buyers. If buyers are willing to pay, then it's justifiable. My personal thought on that is probably, to me, it should be more platform subscription model for 360, or like the music model. Have a subscription, and that entitles you, like Netflix, to X amount of videos, whatever you have, and stuff gets rotated in and rotated out based on how popular it is to viewers, rather than paying for each one individually. I don't even know if it's $8 that's a problem, if it's too much. I just personally think something like that is better served on a communal platform, subscription-wise. But maybe it survives. Maybe it does really well, and hell, this flourishes. My gut tells me no, though. This next story, this is pretty cool tech, and again, just smacks of Captain Obvious once you hear how it works. They are called the Guru 360, and they are portable stabilizers for 360-degree cameras, specifically of the Gear 360 variety, and they have some competitors set up structurally the same. The problem with current stabilizers is they're all designed for smartphones, for cameras, conventional cameras. So they've got obstructions up near the top, which, of course, with a 360-degree camera, which has that 360 field of view, those obstructions are going to block part of the lens. So what the Guru 360 folks have done is they've built that below. So you get a stabilizer that works perfectly with those. Sounds so obvious when you hear it described, but there were none on the market. Now there are, so that's very cool. And it's a 3-axis gimbal, like I said, designed specifically with those obstructions in mind. No mention of the price on those. As that becomes available, I will mention it. Next up, Google patent showing smartphone packaging that doubles as a VR, a la the Google Cardboard, for example. And I love the idea of this. Google wants to have a massive entry-level foundation of VR goodness. And they started that with Cardboard. And that's why you've got so many out there, millions out there. But it's still not one-to-one. With this idea, it could be, and that's what the patent shows. What if you made the box that the phone ships in when the consumer buys it foldable into a Google Cardboard style device? Then suddenly you've got that one-to-one ratio, which is, again, another one of those Captain Obvious ones. It sounds so obvious when it's, worded like that. So curious. Ultimately, the issue with that, the reverse of that, of course, is that it is that lowest common denominator. It doesn't reflect accurately what we get at the higher end of VR. But as long as people are educated and they understand that, look, this is entry level, but this over here is what you could get if you pay a little more. And I'm sure that's part of their marketing strategy. And this next and last story I thought was really neat because it deals with the number of Rifts playing Steam VR games and how it doubled in December after the Oculus Touch launch, meaning, and this is what they're getting out of this, their interpretation is that it opened up all those Vive controller games, or a good chunk of them anyways, because there are some with issues, and that was a reason for the doubling in volume month to month. I'm going to have some pictures up here, and you can click on the link and you can see how stable it was month to month. It was rising, but predictably. And then in December, it just ramps right up. So very neat. Guys, that is it for the Monday news. Again, apologies for the gong show that was last night. Like I said, the video explains why it was taken down and what I did to ultimately get it back up. As always, guys, cheers.